Hey there, this is Ross Izzard, and this is the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast, where we talk about fly fishing in more interesting places. This is the start of Season 2 of the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast. Season 1 was a lot of fun for me. We covered a lot of I would say, foundational information about what exactly backcountry fly fishing is, the guiding principles of backcountry fly fishing, safety information, gear information, and then some really interesting conversations with experts about everything from where to buy your stuff to how to stay safe, to how to interact with search and rescue if you have to do that. So big focus on kind of being prepared out there, big focus on the summer and fall months, and a really good learning experience for me. So I hope you learned a lot. That's obviously the point of the podcast, is to create a sort of knowledge bank for those who are interested in backcountry fly fishing. But I also learned a lot, candidly, about the podcast side and the technical side. I am a government relations guy by training and a fly fisherman. I am not an audio sort of technical expert. I am not a podcasting expert or a recording expert or an audio editing expert. So I've been kind of learning as we go, and there were some bumps in the road, which you probably noticed. So I do feel like we have made some good progress on that. You know, as we come into Season 2, I think we're in a really good spot. Can't promise it's going to be perfect because, you know, this is not what I do full time. And so there might be some bumps here or there, but I do think that we have made some really good strides. And I hope that that is going to mean that you can get a hold of even better information as we head into these colder months. So thanks for being patient with me. Thanks for sticking with us. And I'm really excited about Season 2, which is going to focus pretty exclusively on cold weather fishing. It's November here in Colorado. I am looking out my window in Castle Rock, Colorado. There's about a foot of snow on the ground. It is supposed to snow for the next 2 days straight. And it's winter, a little earlier than I'd like, but hey, you know, October is the bridge month. Like I said last season, November is winter, and can just turn into winter pretty darn quickly. And that's where we are here. So it's time for winter fishing. And that means it's time for us to talk about winter fishing. Now, it's winter time, and I want you to sit back and relax and imagine winter. So imagine that you are sitting on your comfortable couch, maybe with a blanket over you. You have a warm cup of coffee or tea or hot cocoa. You're wearing nice warm socks. You have a fireplace going, and you're cozy, and there's some snow gently falling outside, but you're inside and you're warm and you're happy. And the winter is a beautiful time. It's just a beautiful, cozy, wonderful time to be alive. That's what winter is for the average person. But you are not the average person. You are a fly fisher who wants to go fish in the winter. And that means that you are going to be standing in really, really cold water, in really, really cold weather conditions, fishing, because that's what you do. So you're not going to be warm and cozy. In fact, you're going to be cold, and stuff's going to hurt. And especially your hands are going to hurt along with other parts of you. And there are going to be all of these very challenging conditions and this set of challenges that you are going to have to overcome as a winter fly fisher. This is true whether you are fishing your local tailwater 10 feet from your car, or whether or not you're still making hikes into some of these snow-covered canyons to do your fishing in the backcountry over the winter months. Either way, this is hard stuff. Winter fishing ain't easy. It's tough on your body. It can be tough on your mind. It's tough conditions from a fishing perspective. It requires different gear. And it is just a challenging time. And that, my friends, is why I love it. I love fly fishing all the time, and I do love fly fishing in the warmer months. I've said before that if I could choose to just make every month a nice warm month where I could wet wade and throw a dry dropper or a dry fly and just have fun fishing however I want, I probably would. But if I'm being honest, I get a little excited about winter when it comes around. Not because I necessarily enjoy it. I think, we're definitely talking about type 2 fun here, right? So the type of fun where it's a lot of suffering in the moment, but you can look back on it and go, oh, wow, that was pretty cool. And I'm glad that I did that. I enjoy the winter because of the challenge. I enjoy the fact that you are doing something that nature kind of doesn't want you to do. You're almost not supposed to be out there in the wintertime, right? Nature does not anticipate fly fishing addicts like ourselves going out there in these howling blizzard conditions, standing in frigid water and fishing, because you're just not supposed to do that. Humans aren't really made for those kind of conditions in a lot of ways. And we go do it anyway. And that challenge, I think, is the main appeal of winter fly fishing. It requires a different mind state from you and a different mindset from you that you just don't necessarily have to have for a lot of other stuff. There are other challenges, hiking and conditions and terrain, of course, in the other seasons of the year. But winter is uniquely horrible, and it requires you to have a certain mindset. It requires you to have a certain level of determination, and it requires you to be willing to go out and deal with not one or two variables that are challenging, but a whole bunch of different variables that are challenging. And I think that does three things. The first one is it makes you a better angler. Fly fishing in the winter just is harder than it is fishing at other times of the year. It just is. The fish are different. The conditions are different. The bugs are different. And it's harder. It's more technical. It requires different approaches, different tactics, more accuracy. We'll talk more about that here in a few minutes. But it's just it will make you a better angler because it is tough fishing and it demands a very high level of technical skill on your part to be able to go out and catch fish. Secondly, it really helps you hone in your gear, right? So I've said before that there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad gear. That's really true in the winter. And if you want to find holes in your sort of gear setup, so, where are you not prepared for sort of the worst case conditions? So wet, cold, exposure, wind. This is going to expose it for you pretty quickly. You're going to figure out what that means. You're going to figure out how to navigate, snow fields and post holing and ice and gear considerations and weather conditions and a whole bunch of other stuff that, yeah, you're doing it while you're fishing, but it's really just like outdoor stuff. It's making you a better outdoorsman, a better outdoors person, to be out there in these challenging conditions and locking in your gear, locking in your techniques, learning about how do you avoid avalanches? How do you avoid falling through the ice? How do you sort of read water in these situations where half the river might be frozen? All of those things come into play, and they make you a better and better rounded outdoorsman. Number one, that makes you a better outdoorsman, and that's great in its own right. But number two, it might equip you for a really hard situation later on. Maybe you get stuck in a surprise snowstorm in August somewhere up on a mountain. Maybe you, for whatever reason, find yourself stuck in really bad conditions, and now you're properly geared for it. You know what you need to do. You've got that sort of experience and training, and it develops you as an outdoors person, which I think is a worthwhile pursuit in and of itself. But lastly, it does something for you mentally. And I don't want to wax too philosophical here, but doing hard stuff, and this is, whether it's fly fishing or weightlifting or running a marathon or jujitsu or whatever it happens to be, doing hard stuff that kind of sucks makes you a better person. Not just a better angler, not just a better outdoorsman, but a better person. It develops a level of determination in you. It develops a level of mental toughness in you. And because of those things, it develops self-confidence, the knowledge that you can go out into really tough conditions and you can not just survive and operate in those conditions, but go out and do it successfully. You can go and catch fish in the hardest conditions of the year in these really difficult, frigid rivers. That speaks to your spirit. It speaks to your soul, and it makes you, not just in fishing, but in all aspects of your life, it makes you a better, tougher, stronger, more self-reliant, more independent, more confident person. So yeah, winter fishing sucks. It's not a lot of fun sometimes. I'm not going to lie to you. You're going to have days out there with snot running down your nose and into your beard if you're me, or where your fingers are frozen and they hurt, or it's just whatever's going on, icicles hanging off your nose. And you're going to say, man, this sucks. It's not fun. I'm catching not as many fish as I used to. I get 4 or 5 fish a day. I'm miles away from home. The conditions suck. I'm cold. And yeah, it does. It sucks. I'm not going to lie to you about it. But because it sucks, it's kind of fun. And you're going to come out the other side better in a whole bunch of different ways. So if you don't winter fish now, you should really think about getting out there because you're going to have a lot of solitude. Most people are not going to do this. They're not going to go hang out in those conditions that are in those places with you. You're going to have the whole place to yourself. You're going to have the solitude that you need. It's beautiful. Nature is beautiful in the winter. And man, it's going to develop you. It's like pouring jet fuel onto you. I mean, you are just going to develop at a much more rapid rate doing this kind of challenging fishing than you would otherwise. So it sucks. It's hard. You're not going to like it all the time. But if you take the time to do it, you are really, really going to be glad that you did. Now, most of this season is going to be focused on how we navigate various challenges in the winter. So we're going to get deep into gear considerations, into safety considerations about walking through snow and covering ice. We're going to talk about avalanche safety. We are going to get into how to fish specifically on tailwaters with an expert here in Colorado. And we're going to cover kind of all these different pieces of winter fishing designed to equip you to go out with a bunch of knowledge and a bunch of ideas about how you can do this crazy winter fishing thing and hopefully have a good time, or at least as good of a time as you can. But this first episode, this kind of intro episode, is not about giving you all the solutions. Instead, I really want to spend some time talking about the challenges of winter fishing. So I gave you my soapbox about how it's hard and it sucks and you're going to be cold. Rah, 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 rah. Now I want to talk about the specific challenges. And I want you to take these challenges and I want you to think about them as we sort of head into the season, because these are the things that maybe you thought about a few of them, right? Like it's cold outside. Yeah, you probably thought about that. But you might not have thought about what that means. And so we're going to cover it in the podcast. But I also think, here we are. It's early November. It's winter fly fishing season out west, and it's going to be that for everybody pretty damn soon. Start thinking about these challenges, because if you have them in your head and you know they're coming, you are going to be able to better handle them and better meet them when you get out on the water. So let's jump into the challenges. Let's hit them. There are 6 of these. There are probably more, but we're going to put them in 6 big buckets. The first challenge is the weather, right? The air temperatures. So it's no secret that in the wintertime, air temps get cold. It's not 70 degrees anymore. You can't wet wade anymore. You're going to be out there and the air temps might be, maybe they're 40 or 50 if you're lucky, which is actually fairly pleasant if you're wearing the right stuff. But they might also be 20 or they might be 30 or they might be 10. I have fished in air temperatures all the way down to minus 10 in some canyons out here. And they are, let me tell you, there is a big difference between 25 degrees where you're kind of right on the cusp of freezing and 5 degrees or minus 5 degrees when you are so far down into the bottom of the ice barrel that it's just everything is frozen. And these air temps cause a whole bunch of different challenges. Number one, they really increase your risk of hypothermia, right? So if you get too cold too quickly, if your body temperature drops by more than a degree or 2, you're going to start becoming hypothermic. And once you become hypothermic, life gets really hard. Things get uncomfortable. Things get very unsafe for you. And so you've got this initial challenge with those air temperatures of keeping your body temperature up. How do you insulate your core and your appendages in particular to keep that body temperature up? But it's not just that. It's not just your core temperature. It is also exposed skin. So when you fish, there is really no way. I'm going to say this up front. We'll have a whole episode about gear where we'll talk more in detail about it. I do not believe that there is any solution to having the fingertips on your hands exposed. Any viable solution for a fly fisherman. There is too much that you have to do with the line. There is too much fine motor control required to tie on flies or manipulate split shot or handle a fish or whatever. You're going to have your fingers out. You can cover the rest of your hand, but your fingertips are going to be out. And that means that they are going to be wet because you're fishing and they're going to get wet. And they're going to be exposed to temperatures low enough potentially to cause you, at the worst, frostbite. Which is bad news. Or at the best, they're just going to hurt, right? Like when your fingertips get really, really cold, they stop working. You can't do things anymore. Your fine motor control kind of disappears and it gets hard to manipulate things. But they're also going to start to hurt. And that's something you got to manage. Same with your face. Like you can cover almost all the rest of you. You can try to wear a gaiter over your face or a balaclava, I guess, if you want to be that guy. But, parts of your face are going to be exposed to wind and to cold and to ice and to wet. And you are going to have to find a way to deal with that in a safe way, first of all, but also in a way that allows you to continue fishing and to be successful while you're out there. And then you've got the effect on your equipment, right? So one thing that a lot of people who have not fished in the winter haven't thought about before is that low air temps will really mess up your equipment. You're going to start getting ice in your guides. And that's particularly true if you are stripping your line back in after every cast or moving a whole bunch of line through the guides or reeling it in. You're going to wind up getting ice in those guides because they're going to get wet. And then those air temps are going to hit that wet water on your guides and they're going to freeze. And you're going to have them lock up your line when you have a big fish on it where it's not going to be able to pull line. You're going to lose the fish. It's going to be tough for you to maneuver around it. And it can be a serious problem. Guide ice is a major, major problem when you fish in the winter with temperatures below freezing. Same thing for line ice. If you have never fished with ice on your fly line, then you just have no concept of how terrible it is, right? So imagine your fly line's laying in the water, at least some section of it, because you're usually making longer casts with an indicator rig. It obviously gets coated in water, and then when you pick that line up to make that fly cast, the cold air hits it and it freezes almost instantly. And so you wind up with this fairly small but heavy and clunky and rigid coating of ice on your fly line that makes it like throwing a tree branch around out there, right? The line loses any ability to flex or move. It's not supple anymore. It's heavy, so it tends to sort of sink and behave oddly on the water when the line's on it, or when it's on the water, I should say, when your cast is out. And it's just it's a different thing. And then your indicator might start to freeze depending on what kind of indicator you use. It starts to become a major issue. So air temps, huge issue that you have to be thinking about. And with that comes the weather, right? So the weather can change pretty quickly in the wintertime. You can start out and it's real cold and it might warm up by the end of the day, which means that you've got to layer in a way that, you can take something off and be comfortable when the weather warms up. But also you have to be prepared for it to get really bad on you. I cannot tell you how many times I've been out and just like the weather's unpredictable in the summer with thunderstorms and other stuff, I'm out there, I'm doing my thing. It's warmish, 40, 45, whatever. I'm comfortable. And suddenly it just falls off a cliff. Low pressure system comes in, storm blows in, you lose 25 degrees in an hour, and then it just starts blowing snow and ripping snow on you all over the place. And then you got to get yourself out of there or deal with it. And then you got to get back in your car or your truck and you got to drive through it and get yourself home safely. And so that unpredictable weather is another factor that plays into sort of the air temps and the conditions around fly fishing. Challenge number 1. Challenge number 2 is the water temps, right? So the water's not going to get as cold as the air gets because if water is 10 degrees, then it's frozen, right? And then you have a frozen block of ice and obviously you can't fish a frozen block of ice and all the fish would be dead if it was frozen solid. So that does not happen often on at least the tailwaters where we're primarily fishing in winters. There are some freeze stones where sections will freeze up entirely and the fish have to move. But usually it's not going to freeze all the way, but it will freeze enough that you're going to start getting shelf ice along the banks, right? And that's going to lead to some hard decisions for you. Do you want to step on that or not? Do you want to wade over there or not? But those water temps are going to get real cold. They're going to drop from where they are today, which is kind of low 40s down into the mid 30s. 36 and above, I think you're good to still fish. Below 36, my humble opinion is that you should probably just go home. You might manage to land one if you're out there all day and incredibly tenacious, but I don't believe that fishing water below 36 is a terribly productive use of your time. You're better off just sitting on the bank and enjoying the beauty of winter in nature, rather than trying to fish in water that cold. But it's not just the fishing that it impacts. It also impacts the safety aspect of all this. So when you're out there fishing in water that cold, obviously you're wearing, hopefully, good, high quality winter waders. We'll talk about that in one of our episodes here. But you got to be really careful, right? So if you slip and you fall in the summertime and you get wet, then haha, that was funny. You stand up, you dry off, you have a beer. No big deal. You do the same thing in the wintertime. You slip, you fall in, you get that cold water on you. Well, now you're in trouble, right? That could be life-threatening if you're too far out and far enough out that you can't get back to your car to help quickly. But it'll definitely, regardless of whether it's life-threatening or not, it'll end your day. So I've fallen in the winter. You fall into 35 degree water or 38 degree water. And that's the end. You get wet with water like that when the air temps are 20 or 30 or even 40, then you're done. You have to leave, because if you don't leave, you are risking a seriously dangerous situation. And that has all kinds of effects on your behavior. It affects how deeply you're willing to wade. It affects what things you're willing to step on. You don't want to get your hands wet in water like that, because they will freeze instantly. You don't want to get your gloves wet, even if you're wearing good wool gloves. So you don't want to put your hand in the water to handle fish or untangle your flies or unsnag your flies or steady yourself on a rock if you slip. You really don't want to do any of that stuff in the wintertime, because as soon as you get wet, you're in trouble, and it's real hard to come back from that. Yeah, you can carry a towel, you can do a little bit of something, but if you get really wet, if you really fall in, it's time to go. That's the end for you, and that requires you to be careful. So those water temps affect an awful lot of how you fish, how you wade, how you handle safety, how you gear up, and how you stay warm out there. So everything from your legs and your core, which is obviously a wader and a layering conversation, to your feet, which are really important. Man, fishing in cold feet in cold water is absolutely miserable and will 100% ruin your day. That is the biggest challenge, I think, when you're standing in these rivers, is fishing with cold feet. And I've got some solutions for you on that front, but you should be aware when you're looking at winter fishing, your hands and your feet, those are the big things that you're going to want to solve. And if you haven't done it before, the very first time you go out and your feet hurt because they're so cold, you're going to know what I'm talking about. You're going to go looking for an answer real quick, because that is your number one priority after you've experienced it one time. So challenge 2, water temps. Challenge 3, related to the water temps, is the fish behavior. Right? The water temperatures are lower. Trout have metabolisms that are highly dependent on water temperatures. So the lower the water temp gets, they're cold-blooded animals, the less their metabolism functions and the slower it goes. So they aren't eating very much. They're sitting on the bottom. They're sitting in slower water, conserving energy because there's not a lot of food and it's cold and their metabolisms are shut down. And they're, number one, not eating much at all. You're going to find a lot of fish in the winter who you can see them. They're just sitting there hanging out, and they will not eat. I mean, I have had fish, no joke, where I have bounced a fly literally off the fish's head. Like, I watched the bead head hit the fish in the face, and it didn't eat it, because they're just not, that's not where they are. They're not thinking about it. They are just trying to survive, and they may not be eating. So finding feeding fish to begin with can be a big challenge. But when you do find them, they're not going to move far. They don't want to burn calories. They don't want to burn too much energy. And so the level of accuracy required for you to get a fish to eat your fly is much, much higher in the winter. I think of it as like a window, you know, in the summer and the fall, you throw your flies out there and they might get up and move a foot or 2 feet or 3 feet for a good looking fly. They might come up to the surface. But they're willing to move around. The water's warmer. They're more active. They're feeling good. Wintertime, that's not true. You got to get that fly into the strike zone, which is almost always near the bottom of the river. And you have got to put that thing within about a 2-inch box of that fish's face. And they might not even move that far. It might just be an inch. They don't really want to move. They just want to turn their head, grab the fly, and call it a day. And that does 2 things for you. Number one, it demands more accuracy, which is hard enough as it is for a lot of fly casters, but it's especially hard when you are slinging big, heavy nymph rigs, which is what you're probably going to be doing for almost the entire winter. That's a tough thing to do. It's tough to cast them. It's tough to get them in the right lane. It is tough to get them to be accurate within a couple of feet, much less within a couple of inches. And there's a lot of practice involved there. But then the other thing is that you've got to be able to detect when the fish takes it. You have a strike indicator on there. If you're nymphing the way I usually do, maybe you're Euro nymphing and you have a sighter and you're kind of doing it by feel. That's fine too. But you're going to have to be able to detect these little teeny tiny takes where the fish might just turn its head and give it a little slurp. And that's it. That's all it is. And it's got to move, kind of like I said last season. It has to move all those big heavy flies and your split shot all the way up your tippet and your leader to your strike indicator for the strike indicator to do something, which is usually a really tiny something. So it's easy to miss for you to know that a fish ate it. And by the time that happens, it might have been half a second, which means that you don't have a lot of time to set the hook. You got to be on that like a crazy person setting all day on anything unusual because the takes are just so subtle. And that's a challenge, right? It's a new thing to train yourself out of the really obvious takes in the warmer months into these really subtle takes in the winter months, or you're going to stand there flogging the water for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours never touch a fish and not know why. Well, you probably did touch a lot of fish. You just didn't know. You just didn't see it happen. So that's a challenge. And it's going to slow you down. So number one, you're not going to want to wade as fast, like I said, because it's cold and the water temps are cold. You don't want to slip. But also, it's not quite the same as summer fishing where you can just pop a fly, maybe 3, 4, 5 casts into a slot, and you get pretty good drifts. And you're like, okay, well, I tried this, pretty good presentation there. Nothing came up. I'm going to move on to the next spot. Well, in the winter, like I said, you may not have a lot of next spots. You got to go find the next pod of feeding fish or the next likely place if you're just prospecting. And that can be, your options are more limited as far as where those fish are in the winter and where you can find feeding fish in the winter compared to the warmer months. But also, you've got to sort of slow down your fishing to make sure you've covered the necessary water. So, like I said, you could pop a fly into something with just a couple of pretty good drifts over a general area in the summer and feel like you covered it. In the winter, though, because those fish aren't going to move, because they might only move an inch or two, you have to real methodically pick apart the water. So you got to do this seam, and then you got to do that seam, and then you got to do between the seams, and you might have to do, 3 or 4 casts to cover 2 feet of water so that you know that you put those flies within the proximity that a fish needed to eat them. And that's going to slow you down. So in the summer, long day, I might fish 3, 4 miles from stream. I'm just ripping up there and wading upstream. In the winter, same amount of time, I'll be lucky if I cover a mile. It's slower going. It's much more methodical. It takes more time. And that's just the way it is. So that's a challenge that comes along with those fish behaviors as well. And you just got to make your peace with it because the fish don't care what you think. You got to meet them on their terms. You got to be willing to do what they need you to do to catch them if you want to be out there and be fishing successfully in the wintertime. And that's a hard thing. So number 3, fish behavior. Number 4, bug behavior. This is obviously very intimately tied to fish behavior, but bugs act different in the winter. You don't see a lot of mayflies popping off in the middle of the winter. Maybe late winter, you start seeing those BWOs come off a little bit. But for the most part, you're not going to see a lot of that. You might see some midge hatches here or there, but the vast majority of the insect activity is going to be pretty muted. It's larvae bouncing around on the bottom of the river and the substrate and the rocks. Fish are grabbing those things where they can, but these are pretty much all larval stages of the insects. So that's primarily what you're going to be fishing. You're going to be fishing nymphs, and you're going to be fishing a lot of nymphs that imitate the larval stage of your caddis, your baetis and mayfly species, your stonefly species, which are very important in the winter. They have a really, really long life cycle where there may be stonefly nymphs bouncing around there every month of the year because they have a 2-year life cycle for some of those species where they're underwater for a real long time before they finally pop up. So those are pretty important in the wintertime. And then also midges. So this is the season where you're tying on your little teeny tiny, like size 24 black zebra midges or top secret midges or mercury midges or whatever it happens to be. Because that is what the fish are feeding on. And the vast majority of what they're feeding on are teeny tiny little insects. And they're usually midges, and they're almost all subsurface. If you do see a really cool midge hatch and you get a chance to tie on a Griffith's net or a midge pattern and do a little bit of dry fly fishing in the winter, rock on, dude. Like, more power to you. I love when that happens. You just can't count on it. There are not a lot of bugs that are really active in the wintertime, and that means that you've got to go and imitate the food sources that the fish have available to them. That is these leftover larvae. It's midges. It might be streamers, although be careful about streamers. It's a good way to freeze your fingers off. We'll talk more about that in our episode about hands and feet coming up here in a couple weeks. But your options as far as fly selection and tactics and stages of the insect that you're imitating, they're going to get more limited because insect behavior is tougher in the wintertime. So that's number 4. Insect behavior is tougher. Number 5 is access on foot. So I still do hiking in the winter. There are several canyons near me where I still love to hike in. They both happen to be, well, I should say all of them happen to be below bottom release dams. So they're tailwaters where the water stays warm enough that it doesn't freeze and I might stand a snowball's chance, pun intended, of catching a fish. But I still hike in there because I love the backcountry, right? I mean, I'm okay with car fishing and I'll do a little bit of that in the wintertime. Because I have to, and the alternative is not fishing, which for me is very bad for my mental health and my mind state, and everybody else around me, because I'm just not a lot of fun to be around when I'm not getting my time on the water. But I still hike, and even if you're not hiking, even if you're just parking and you got to go down the embankment to the river, you've got serious issues there. You have snow on the ground. It's easy to slip and fall in the snow. It might be deep snow. You could post hole in that stuff and break your leg between a couple of rocks. It could be ice where you slip and you fall, or you can't get any traction. It could be slippery to the point where you can get down, but you can't find your way back out. It's too slippery to climb out. So you've got to be cognizant of how the hell you're going to get out of that, either from the bottom of the embankment or out of the canyon access at the end of the day. And that is a whole nother universe of stuff you have to think about. And all of that is backed by the fact that if you fall, man, I've taken some nasty falls in the winter. Seriously, really nasty falls. My knee actually still hurts occasionally from a fall that I took 2 years ago where I came down and slammed it on a pointy, sharp rock in one of my favorite canyons out here. I've seen other guys eat shit out there. People break their legs, they break their arms, they hurt their backs, they smack their heads. It is, it's dangerous, and it's something you got to think about. So access on foot safely is another challenge that you got to be thinking about once you have snow and ice on the ground. Number 6, and the final one that I want to put out there for now, is road conditions. So just like you have to think about this stuff as it relates to, walking in and your traction and your shoes and your footwear, you got to think about getting there in a car, right? So I was actually going to go fish today. That was my plan. I have my one fishing day a week. I had set aside this day to go because I haven't been able to get my fishing days in recently due to some travel and work being crazy. And I was like, man, I'm going to get out there come hell or high water. Got my truck, started heading toward my local river here, and got not stuck, but far enough in where I was like, I don't think I can do this safely. I'm not, even in a 4-wheel drive truck with great tires. I didn't have sand in the back today, so that's my mistake, but we'll need to do that. We'll need to put some sand in there to get a little bit of weight on those rear tires. But I can't get there safely, right? And that becomes a real challenge. Like when you wake up in the morning, it's not just about what the fishing conditions are going to be, not just about what happens when you get there. You got to start thinking about whether or not you can get there, right? So can your vehicle do that? Are you equipped to handle deep snow? Are you equipped to handle mud? Are you equipped to deal with it if you get stuck somewhere with no reception? Do you have the stuff that you need in case you get yourself in a ditch somewhere? Can you call for help, or can you extricate yourself? Do you have time to sit through traffic on a highway when somebody inevitably crashes their car because it's slippery and they're driving too fast? Do you have the time set aside for potential traffic snarls and issues like that? And so that vehicular side of access is another huge part of this. And I'll revisit this story here later this season, but just a quick one for you. A couple years ago, this was actually in April, but it was in Montana. So April in Montana, still pretty much winter. And I had booked myself some time on a river up there on a private piece of land. And I was real excited to get out there. So I did my work. I was up there for work. I got some stuff done. And then I packed my stuff up in my rental car and I headed over to this immaculate, beautiful piece of private property. It's a ranch. And I get there and I'm driving along those little dirt ranch access roads, and I got stuck in my Toyota Corolla. And I got stuck bad. I mean, like, I could not get out of this thing. And I had to go all the way back to the house where the guy who owns the property lives and ask him for help. And so he had to get his tractor, and he brought it out, and we were like, throwing rocks under my tires to try to get traction there. He's trying to nudge me. I'm pushing, and it was just hopelessly stuck. And the only way we eventually got it out was for us to basically wrap a chain around the axle, attach it to the tractor, and literally drag this thing out of the snow. And this was not a lot of snow. I mean, we're talking like, 4 or 5, maybe 6 inches of snow. So nothing that in a normal vehicle I would be concerned about. But hey, I wasn't equipped. That vehicle wasn't ready for it. I got a little too aggressive and got screwed. It was horribly embarrassing. I mean, I was just mortified about this. I felt awful about being stupid, about trying it, about making this guy come out in the cold. And it's really damn cold in Montana during those months. And it just was hard. And it wasted half my day. I still went out there. I still caught fish. I had fun in the end. But I don't think I can ever go back because I'm just too ashamed about it. And it really taught me a lesson about the fact that if you don't plan for vehicular access, can you get a car in there? to the parking lot or wherever you happen to be going, you might have a bad time. You could spend 2 hours driving up there and have to turn around and come back. Well, that sucks. You just lost 4 hours of your day and you never touched the water. Or you could get stuck, which could be real embarrassing like it was for me, or it could be really dangerous depending on where you happen to be, slide off the road, whatever. Right? You guys can use your imagination, but a bunch of shit can go wrong if you're not planning carefully about how you do access in your car or your truck. Something to think about. That's challenge number 6. And that's it for the big buckets. There's more to it, right? There's terrain conditions, avalanche conditions, other stuff that we should talk about and that we're going to talk about over the course of the season. But just to kind of frame season 2 for you, that is what you're looking at in the winter. These are the hard things, the big rocks, so to speak, that you are going to have to be able to deal with and move over the winter. And there are ways to do it. There are solutions to all of these things. Well, maybe not solutions. There are no solutions, only trade-offs, right? Thomas Sowell. But there are ways to mitigate them and ways to make sure that you are successful and safe and getting better out there, even when the conditions are super duper tough. So this is sort of a little bit of a teaser. I want to throw the hard stuff and the challenges at you for now so that you can think about them, meditate on them, think about what this winter fishing thing is and what makes it so hard and so different than fishing the rest of the year. And then we're going to come back. We're going to talk about how to fix it, how to work around it, how to mitigate it. So I'm looking forward to doing that with you. If you're not a winter fisherman, that's cool. You don't have to be. Listen, no shame. A lot of people don't because it sucks and it's hard. And if you don't want to do it, I think you should. I think it'll make you better, but no judgment, no shame if you choose not to. For those hardy souls who are tough enough and mentally ill enough to be out there fishing in the dead of winter in the coldest months of the year, this season is for you. And I am really, really excited to dig into some of this. So take these challenges, think about them, chew on them. We'll be back next week and we're going to start beating on them until we have some ways forward. Thanks, everybody. I hope you're having a great week. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you real soon. Till next time, this is Ross. Maybe I'll see you out there, but probably not because it's real cold.